Hi everyone. So today we are going to talk about the wedding ceremony. And I know you're all probably thinking, oh, the walk up the aisle. Every time you think about it, you're probably feeling like fainting. Because, you know, I'd say with brides, and especially me, because we got married 11 years ago. And that was actually the one thing that I worried about coming up to the wedding, was walking up the aisle. And things that would naturally go through your head would be, am I going to trip? Am I going to fall? Is everything going to be okay? Am I going to be a bundle of nerves? Yes, you are going to be a bundle of nerves, but they're good nerves. But when it comes to the wedding ceremony, walking up the aisle is one thing you will think about, but there are so many other things that happen that you wouldn't think about and that you wouldn't plan for. So today I'm going to fill you in on everything. So when it comes to the wedding ceremony, you have to sort of think, am I getting married at 1 o'clock? How long is the ceremony going to happen? Is it going to happen in a church? Are you having a spiritual ceremony back at the hotel? So for example, I'm going to talk about your ceremony as if it's happening in a church. And these are the kind of the rules that I stick to, and I give these tips to all of my own wedding couples. So if you're getting married at 1 o'clock, the groom needs to really be up at the ceremony, up at the church for 12:30. And I know that that sounds a little bit early, but there are a number of things that you'll want to do when you get to the church. The celebrant will want to speak to you for a few minutes. You want to have a look into the church to make sure that everything is the way it should be. There might be booklets to sort out, you know, to give to the ushers, to stand at the front door, to hand out to all the guests arriving to your wedding day. And that kind of takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes to do all of those bits and pieces. Your photographer is going to want to take photographs of you as a groom up at the ceremony. And he's going to want, or he or she's going to want to take photographs of you with your parents, you with the groomsmen, you with maybe some members of the family, guests arriving and wishing you well, because the bride misses all that, and it's just nice to have all that documented so you can look back afterwards. I love when my bride is on time walking up the aisle. I'm a stickler for time. And I think when you've organised a wedding ceremony for 1 o'clock, the bride needs to be walking up the aisle no later than 1:05. And, and I would get this said to me all the time. What if guests are still arriving? Well, I hate to say this to you, but even when you've walked up the aisle and you're halfway through the ceremony, there will still be a guest or two coming in the back door. So, that's just what happens. But if you're 30 minutes late walking up the aisle, you're 30 minutes late for your drinks reception, and they're still going to ring the bell at the ceremony at the same time later on for the meal. So you don't want to miss out on any of that drinks reception. So let's start talking about the ceremony and how it's all going to happen. So like I said, groom arrives 12:30. Bridesmaids then arrive to the ceremony no later than 12:55. That gives the photographer then, a chance to photograph them, getting out of the car, getting a little shot of them outside the ceremony. It also gives a chance for all of those guests standing outside the church to go in and take a seat, because the bride is on her way. She's the next one to arrive. And the bride really ideally should be driving into the wedding ceremony at 1 o'clock and no later with her dad, if dad is around, and I always have to say that when I talk about daddies of the bride, because my own dad, bless him, wasn't there for any of our wedding ceremonies because he passed away when we were quite young. So whoever is in the car with the bride really should be arriving no later than 1 o'clock. One of the biggest points I suppose I should really say to you, and this is not something that you would think about because you would think the photographer should be there. Sometimes things do go wrong, and I've often got stuck in traffic or taken a wrong road to the church. And, no, it's never happened where the bride is there before me, but just in case, don't get out of your wedding car until you can physically see the wedding photographer, because that person is going to want to photograph you, in the car, get some photographs of you outside the car and some shots of the church in the background before you walk up the aisle. So make sure you see your photographer. The next thing then is the walk up the aisle, and that is what I talked about at the beginning of this. It's that moment where you're like, oh, it's happening. But just before the bride walks up the aisle, the bridesmaids need to bear in mind that the photographer now is going to be at the top of the aisle, at the very top, just, where with the groom facing. the altar, and they're going to want to get photographs of all of those bridesmaids walking up the aisle. Now, this has happened to me before, where the bridesmaids are on top of each other walking up the aisle, and in that case you can only get the first bridesmaid, and it's really very difficult to get the second bridesmaid because the first bridesmaid is blocking her. So make a plan when you're walking up the aisle for the bridesmaids to give yourselves nearly a half an aisle in between each other, and then that way your photographer can get all of those photographs of the bridesmaids. And my tip to my bride when she begins her walk up the aisle is to make sure that the aisle is completely clear. Because yes, the bridesmaids have walked up and everybody has admired their dresses, but you're the celebrity. You're the one they want to see. So do not step foot into that church until the aisle is clear. Walking up the aisle and how fast to walk. I mean, sometimes brides, get very nervous and they nearly run up the aisle, and don't do that because everybody wants to see you, and you just want to make sure that you make a nice entrance and that you're not walking too fast, but that you're not walking too slow either. Don't walk too slow. I always sort of say to my groom as well, for the photographs, look straight up to the aisle. Keep your back to the bride until I tell you to look. Because that way I'm getting some gorgeous photographs of the groom looking into the camera or looking straight ahead. And he's in focus, and I have the bride and her dad out of focus coming up the aisle. And then I'll tell him to look. You can look now. That's brilliant. I love that bit. And then he looks. And when he looks, then I'm focused on the bride and her dad. And that way then I'm getting, I suppose, both reactions to each other. And that's just like gold. And this is another thing that I would always sort of say to my own couples. When, you get to the top of the aisle, bride, with your dad or whoever's walking you up the aisle, take your time. Your dad's going to want to embrace your husband. He'll shake his hand. He'll give him a hug. He'll do whatever comes naturally to him. But before he goes back to his seat, make sure you give your dad an old cuddle. He's after handing you away. It's emotional. Life is life. But, time goes by so fast. And for him, it's not that long ago since he was, bringing you to school for the first time and, driving you to your first kind of disco and telling you to take off those short skirts that you're wearing. But, life is life, and it's gone by in the blink of an eye for him. So give him an old hug before he goes back to the seats. For me, as a photographer, I look at the daddy going back to the seat, and sometimes, in the moment, my bride might forget to do that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the poor dad. And he could be crying. And I'm crying. I mean, I'm doing this 18 years and I'm crying because dad's crying. So give him a cuddle. And once that happens, he'll naturally go back into his seat. And then you can embrace your husband-to-be. And once you do that, then hand away your flowers to whoever is closest to you. So whichever bridesmaid is closest to you, give your flowers away. And the reason why I say, give the flowers away is that you're not going to use them again until you're walking back down the aisle. And one of the next things you're going to be doing is going up onto the altar. The priest will start the mass, and you're going to go up and light your unity candles. If you've got a bouquet of flowers in your hand, you're not going to be able to light your unity candle because this is in your way. You need both hands to be able to maneuver your dress up onto the altar. He's going to hand you, something to light the candle with, and you're going to need your free hands. But just going back to that point, where dad hands you away. One of the questions I would get asked a lot is, what side should my dad be on walking up the aisle? So, people differ about this opinion, but my opinion, and I think it's a really good point I'm about to make here, is that when your dad hands you away, really, ideally, he should be able to just turn into his seat. So when he's looking at the altar, he just has to turn in left because that's where he's going to be sitting. A lot of the time, the priest or the celebrant might tell your dad to walk over the other side and walk up on the groom's side. And that's fine. And if that's what you want to do, that's okay. However, when he's going back into his seat, he has to actually walk past you at the back and climb over your dress, and if you're wearing a veil, and get into his seat. And I don't know how many times I have seen a dad standing on a dress and a veil coming out and all of that. So if you want it all to happen seamlessly, make sure your dad walks up on the left-hand side so that he can just pop into his seat. Okay? That's like an amazing tip. When you're lighting your candles, let's go back to the candles. You know, you're holding like this kind of long wick in your hand, and if you just hold it with one hand, so you're lighting a candle to light your candle. You know, sometimes what can happen is your hand can shake, right? Really shake. And if your congregation, if your guests see that happening, they can all start laughing. And while that's funny for them, it's not so funny for you. So what I would say is, if he's handed you a long wick to light your unity candle, hold it with both hands and then light your unity candle. And then that's that problem gone. The next thing that will happen is that you'll sit down and the Mass will start. And my biggest tip here is just take a big deep breath and relax. You're with your husband to be, you're with your wife to be, you're with your other half to be. It's just going to be amazing. And the ceremony is going to happen the way it's planned by the priest or the celebrant. One of the things I would always say to my own couples is that the readers then will get up to do some readings. Generally, in a ceremony, you'll have two readers. You'll have a first reading and you'll have a second reading. And sometimes there's a piece of music between those two readings. And this is so funny every time it happens. The second reader gets up to read and forgets that there's actually a bit of music here. So the psalm will happen and you could have the musicians singing a psalm and it's the length of a song. And they're standing now next to the microphone ready to speak and it's not their time to speak. So tell them just to wait until the psalm is over and then get up, and that's sort of when they do their reading. What'll happen then is, you know, the priest will get up and he'll do, you know, a little chat to everybody. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes. And after that, then you do your rings and your vows. You say your vows to each other. You put on your wedding rings. And the amount of times that the bride and the groom look at the priest when they're doing their vows, when they're saying their vows, you're not marrying the priest. So you look at the person you're marrying and you say your vows to them. So many times I'm standing there with my camera thinking to myself, will you look at your husband, not the priest? So look at your husband, look at your wife when you're doing your vows. Be in the moment. And I know it's all a bit like, you know, you'll get nervous and people are looking at you, but just try and be in the moment with your other half at the top, you know, because that's kind of what it's about. And when you look back at your photos, if you're looking at your priest, you'll be like, oh, why did I do that? Anyhow, you'll get married and the rings will go on. Make sure you put the ring on the right finger. The amount of times as well that I see a bride especially putting the groom's ring on the wrong hand. It goes on your left hand, this finger here, okay? So just make sure you have the correct hand. Does it mean we're not married if I put the ring on the other finger? No, it doesn't. Not at all. I've had that asked to me so many times as well. No, pardon me. One of the things that we do actually at that point, because really, you know, it's about photographs and it's about having really beautiful, it's obviously about being married, but it's about having really fabulous photographs. Amy, who helps me, she's my photography assistant. She comes along to all of my weddings with me and she's amazing. And what I would ask Amy to do when she's with me is when they stand up to do their rings and their vows would be to take those chairs away that you're sitting on, you know, put one to the left, one to the right and lay out the wedding dress so that she has this beautiful kind of shot that she's going to photograph, and she'll get that from the aisle while I'm up sort of nearer the priest, kind of getting the closer in shots of the rings going on. You're not always going to have an Amy. So what I would suggest is that you get your groomsmen to lift those chairs out of the way just for that moment. Because if you don't lift the chairs out of the way, what's going to happen then is your photographer is going to be shooting that from the back and your chairs are going to be in the way and you're not going to see your dress. So chairs out of the way, it takes like 3 seconds to do it. Get the bridesmaids to lay out the dress so that, you know, your photographer has a beautiful shot. And that's just really important. It's just one of those shots that you could have. You can have the whole church in as well and the whole altar in. It's a really nice picture to have. You're married. And the next thing you're going to do, hopefully, is kiss. Sometimes the priests don't tell you to kiss. If they don't, I'd just go and do it anyway. It's a lovely opportunity. You're married now, so why wouldn't you? And I often see a bride and groom going, do we kiss now? Don't we? Yeah, go in for the kiss. And then the next thing you're going to do then is go up and light your middle candle. your unity candle. So that kind of, signifies that the two of you are one now. You've committed yourselves to each other for the rest of your life. And now you're going to light that middle candle. So again, what you're going to do is sort of get your wick, I call them. You're going to light your outside candles, and now you are going to light that middle candle to signify your marriage. Take your time. Your photographer wants to get a gorgeous photograph. Don't do it in a hurry. And when you're lighting the candle, smile. The amount of times this happens where they're like kind of, oh God, is that lighting? Is that not lighting? And I can tell what they're thinking by looking at their face. Smile, you're married. Remember, this photograph's been taken all the time. Be in the moment. You'll go back to your seats. And, this is kind of in a ceremony in a church. This is where the consecration happens. And this is kind of like a little bit of a holy time. And most of the time I don't take photographs during this time because you're not really meant to. But if I see a little moment happening between the bride and groom, I'm all over it. And sometimes it's just like, oh, look at our rings. And they're looking at each other's wedding ring. And that's a lovely moment to have. For me, when I'm photographing a wedding, I love to sort of zoom into the moments that are naturally unfolding between the bride and groom, or, between a group of guests if they're standing at the drinks reception having a laugh. I love to stick on a long lens and zoom into that when they don't even know the camera's on them. And I suppose when my bride and groom, when they look back at their photographs, then they can nearly remember what they were thinking during those photographs. So just try as much as you can on the day to be in the moment. I would often have people say to me, God, the day goes by so fast. Like, it's gone by in the blink of an eye. And it does, I suppose. But when you think about the day itself, there are so many people to talk to. Sometimes you've got 100, 150 people there at the ceremony or, at the wedding. And they all want a bit of you. They all want to talk to you. I'm nearly the least of your worries. So just try and take a moment every now and again with each other to go, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And look around and try and, take it all in. Because you'll remember the day more if you do that. That's just another little tip I have, because it's the one thing that I did on my wedding day. And I didn't feel like my wedding day went by in the blink of an eye, because I suppose I savoured every bit of it. I know I'm in the industry and I was sort of privileged to have that experience. But just for everybody else who's getting married, just, try not to go through the day in a haze. Just be in the moment as much as you can. There will be communion given out, in the ceremony. It's another lovely time for the bride and groom at the top, for the couple to just, be together and have the chats and nearly talk about the morning and how did your morning go, and just get together and, enjoy. One of the other things that happens really at the end of a ceremony would be that, somebody will get up and read a reflection. And that's quite emotional as well. Sometimes it's a nice poem or it's a nice prayer. And it's another little moment for the bride and groom to be together, to be in the moment and enjoy it. One big tip that I would have to give about a wedding ceremony would be, I love it when the bride and groom the couple are actually facing the altar. And they have their backs to the congregation, because from a photography point of view, it gives the photographer so many more opportunities for photographs. Like recently I had a wedding and the priest put the bride and groom up onto the altar over to the right hand side facing everybody. And I was thinking, oh, Mother of God. And there was a singer behind them, and she had this big ring light because she was recording herself singing, and she was going to use it obviously for her YouTube channel afterwards, which is fair enough. But you've got the couple sitting there and you've got this big ring light sticking up in the background, and it was a nightmare. And even though I had a long lens and I could zoom in, this pole was still coming up in the back of all the photographs. So it's not great when you sit over to the left or to the right of the altar. It doesn't always work from a photographic point of view. And especially if you're in a venue, if you're getting married in the hotel and the singers or the musicians want to be up there too, they're over the other side. So your photographer is very limited now as to where they can go. So if you're facing the altar, keeping your back to everybody, your photographer can go one side or the other, and it just makes for an easier job on the day and much nicer photographs. So you're married. It's time to sign the register. And nothing really is legal in Ireland until you sign that register. And one of the tips that I would give you here about signing a register is get a nice pen. Don't leave that job up to the priest or up to the celebrant, because those pens aren't always gorgeous. The amount of times that I've had to photograph a couple signing the register with one of those yellow Bic pens, and they're awful. So I'm not saying go out and spend €150 on a pen, but just go out and get a nice pen, one that's going to look nice in the photographs. The other tip I'll give you about signing the register is that please be in the moment. When your other half is signing, look down and watch what they're doing. And equally, if the bride is sitting down and her other half is signing the documentation, make sure you're aware and you're watching and you're smiling and you're looking and you're taking it all in. The worst thing that can happen is that the groom can start chatting to the groomsmen behind him or waving down to his friends at the end of the aisle. They're not the photographs that the photographer wants. The photographer wants a nice photograph of the two of you signing the register as you're signing the register, because that's as natural as you can get. Don't be getting caught in other moments talking to everybody else. That's the moment. And I suppose one of the biggest tips there is if you sign on the wrong line, a line has to go through your name, the celebrant has to sign it, you have to then sign on another name, and the page is in a mess. And that's all because you were, waving down to Mickey Finn at the end of the aisle. Don't be waving to any of your pals, just be in the moment. You have loads of time to chat to everybody else. And when you have signed the register, generally your photographer will take a photograph of everybody there. I always recommend that it's just the couple and the two witnesses who are signing the register with you. Sometimes the celebrant will bring the entire bridal party up. It drives me mad when that happens in a church when there's no room. And especially, if you've got 5 bridesmaids and 5 groomsmen and you've got the couple in the middle. And I would often say to the priest, where am I going to put them? Oh, well, you're the photographer, it's nothing to do with me. And I'm thinking, why did you bring them up? They didn't need to be here. So you don't need your bridal party up at the register. There is no job for them up there except to smile and pose at the camera. And there's lots of opportunities to do that later on. So the couple and your two witnesses, and that's it. And once the register is signed, then it's time to walk down the aisle. That's the best bit. That's when you're really in the moment. You're married, everybody stands up, they're all clapping you out of the ceremony, and it's just the best bit. I love then to kind of take 1 or 2 photographs as the couple are just about to walk down the aisle. And then I am running down to the end of the aisle so that I can zoom up with the lens and capture those little moments that are naturally unfolding, where they're looking left and they're looking right and they're smiling at people and they're not even thinking that you're photographing them. I love that bit, So don't rush down the aisle either. Take your time walking down the aisle and enjoy every single bit of it. And I suppose to finish up this podcast, I'm going to talk about kind of, when you stand at the end of the aisle, are you now going to do a meet and greet? Oh, I'm famous for this. I recommend that you don't do it. Especially if you've gone and you've got married at a ceremony and the venue's a half an hour away. If you do a meet and greet and you've got 150 people coming to your wedding, you are going to be standing at the church door for 40 minutes. Okay, 40 minutes. Now, you might think, gosh, that's okay. But that's 40 minutes I could have done with back at the hotel. I need a full hour to get family photographs, bridal party photographs, and my couple photographs. And you have spent 40 minutes chatting to people at the end of the church, which is fine if that's what you want to do. A lot of couples don't want to do it now, and especially, since the pandemic, most of the churches and ceremony venues advise you not to do it. And the other thing for the brides would be just to tell you this, and for the grooms, think about the amount of people who are going to be kissing you and hugging you and wishing you well after you've walked down the aisle. They're still in that moment. They're still, there. You're just married. They're like, and they throw the arms around you and they pull the veil off you and they leave lipstick on your face. And the amount of times I've had to take out the bride's makeup bag and fix her makeup because she's sometimes left with a big baldy patch on the side of her face because everybody's kissing her. And for the groom then, on his lapel, he's got all makeup all over him. And again, people are not thinking. You've got gorgeous girls who have gone out and got faces full of makeup done on the morning, which is absolutely fine. And then they go in, they give the groom a big hug, and sometimes there's lipstick on his collar and there's makeup on his jacket, and it's a disaster. So I suppose you get my point. Don't do the meet and greet if you can at all. And And if you don't do the meet and greet and you go straight back to the hotel, one of the tips I would give you would be just to tell your families, once they walk down the aisle, and especially the bridal party, to get into their cars and go before you, so that you're arriving in after they've arrived. Because you don't want to be arriving back to your venue and you're just the only ones. There's nobody to clap you in. There's nobody to, give you that bit of atmosphere when you arrive back. You want some people there. And that's really, I suppose, when I start to do my photographs as soon as I arrive back to the venue. Because one of the biggest things that I suppose I would like to give couples on their wedding day would be to have lots of time at their drinks reception. So the two most important things for me would be to get gorgeous photographs, which are going to happen anyway, and to make sure that my couple get time at their drinks reception. If you do a meet and greet at the church, you come back, you freshen up because you're kind of a little bit destroyed with, all the kissing and hugging. It's probably going to be another 15, 20 minutes before you get into your photos. So you've kind of really wasted about an hour and 15 minutes doing a meet and greet. So have a good think about that. In one of my next podcasts, we'll be talking about drinks reception, how to have the best time, and how much time you can get at your drinks reception if you're organised. But that's it for today. That was the ceremony. Thank you so much for joining me, and thanks to Clarence for being my partner on this amazing podcast. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you back here next week.